The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty courthouse parking lot as David sat in his old pickup truck, staring at the building where his life had fallen apart 3 years ago. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound breaking. The early morning silence. He'd driven here without really thinking about it. The way people sometimes find themselves at places that hold painful memories. David was 42 now, with calloused hands that told the story of 20 years building homes for other people's dreams. His dark hair showed more gray these days, and the lines around his eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights and worried thoughts. But it was his eyes that told the real story, once bright with hope and trust, now guarded and careful, like windows with the curtains drawn tight 3 years ago. Those courthouse doors had sealed the end of his marriage to Linda, the woman he'd thought he'd grow old with. The divorce papers had been signed, the assets divided, and the promises they'd made to each other officially declared broken. But the real breaking had happened months before, when he'd walked into his construction office to find Linda kissing his business partner, Rick, the same Rick who'd been his best friend since high school, the same Rick who'd stood beside him as his best man at their wedding. The betrayal had hit David like a sledgehammer to the chest. It wasn't just losing his wife, it was losing his faith in people, in promises, in the idea that some things in life could be counted on to last. Linda had taken half of everything they'd built together, including half of the construction business. Rick had taken the other half when he'd left town with Linda, leaving David to start over from nothing. But David wasn't really nothing. He had his 2 daughters, 8-year-old twins, Lily and Rose, who lived with him full-time now. Linda had moved to another state with Rick, calling the girls every Sunday but otherwise absent from their daily lives. At first, David had been angry about this too. How could a mother just leave her children behind? But as time passed, he'd come to see it as a blessing. The girls were better off with consistency, with a parent who showed up every day, who helped with homework and made pancakes on Saturday mornings. David had rebuilt his construction business from the ground up, working 18-hour days while the girls were at school and after they went to bed. He'd earned back his reputation one job at a time, proving to the small mountain town of Willowbrook that he was still the same reliable, skilled craftsman he'd always been. His phone rang constantly now with requests for custom cabinets, home additions, and full house builds. Success had returned, but something inside him remained broken. The girls had asked him once why he never dated anyone. Lily, always the more direct of the twins, had pointed out that their friend Katie's dad had a girlfriend, and she seemed nice enough. David had explained that some people were meant to be married, and others were meant to focus on being good parents instead. The girls had accepted this explanation easily, the way children do when adults speak with certainty about things they don't understand. But David's decision to avoid romantic relationships went deeper than just focusing on fatherhood. He'd made a promise to himself, sealed with the same determination he brought to every construction project. Never again would he give someone the power to tear down what he'd built. Never again would he trust someone enough to share his life, his dreams, his children's hearts. The risk was simply too great. The potential for destruction too real. He'd become an expert at politely deflecting the well-meaning attempts of friends and neighbors to set him up with single women in town. There was always a cousin visiting from the city, or a new teacher at the elementary school, or a friend of a friend who was just perfect for him. David had learned to smile and thank them while making it clear he wasn't interested. Most people eventually stopped trying, though a few persistent souls continued their matchmaking efforts. The truth was, David had everything he needed. His daughters filled his heart with a love that felt safe and unconditional. His work gave him purpose and pride. His small house on Maple Street was comfortable and peaceful. He created a life that worked, a life that couldn't be disrupted by someone else's broken promises or changing feelings. Some evenings, after the girls were asleep, David would sit on his front porch with a cup of coffee and watch the stars appear over the mountains that surrounded Willowbrook. In those quiet moments, he sometimes wondered what it would be like to share the view with someone else, to have a conversation that went beyond bedtime stories and homework help. But those thoughts were fleeting, pushed away as quickly as they came. His routine was predictable and safe. Up at 5:30 to review the day's work schedule. Coffee and toast while checking emails from potential clients. Wake the girls at 7, make breakfast, ensure they had everything needed for school. Drop them off at Willowbrook Elementary by 8:15, then head to whatever job site needed his attention. Pick up the girls at 3:30, help with homework, make dinner, supervise baths and bedtime routines. After 9 o'clock, a few hours of paperwork, planning tomorrow's work, or working on furniture pieces in his garage workshop. That was a good life, David told himself. A simple life. A life where he controlled the variables and minimized the risks. His daughters were happy, healthy, and thriving. His business was more successful than ever. He owned his house outright, had money in the bank, and could provide. Well, for his family, what more could a man ask for? As he sat in the courthouse parking lot that morning, David's phone buzzed with a text from his foreman, Jake, asking about the timeline for the Henderson kitchen renovation. Reality called, pulling him back from his memories and into the present day. He started the truck, put it in reverse, and drove toward the job site where he was expected. He didn't know that 200 miles away, a young woman was standing in front of a mirror, questioning every choice that had led her to that moment. He didn't know that her world was about to collapse in a way that would send her running toward his quiet mountain town. He didn't know that his carefully constructed life was about to be challenged by someone whose pain matched his own, whose courage would force him to examine the walls he'd built around his heart. David drove through Willowbrook's main street, past the diner where he ate lunch most days, past the hardware store where everyone knew his name, past the elementary school, where his daughters were learning about fractions and state capitals. This was his world, predictable and safe. He couldn't imagine that within weeks everything would change, that a stranger would walk into his life and make him question whether building walls was the same thing as building a future. The day stretched ahead of him like all the others, filled with the honest work of creating homes for other people, while he remained carefully, deliberately alone in his own. Maya Chain stood frozen in front of the full-length mirror, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate pearl necklace around her neck. The ivory silk wedding dress fit perfectly, every detail exactly as she'd planned for the past 2 years. The beading caught the morning light streaming through the hotel suite windows, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the expensive wallpaper. She should have felt beautiful, radiant, ready to walk down the aisle to marry the successful lawyer who waited for her downstairs. Instead, she felt like she was suffocating. The hotel suite buzzed with activity around her. Her mother, Helen, balked orders at the wedding planner while adjusting flower arrangements that had already been adjusted 3 times. Her sister Jennifer touched up her own makeup, complaining about the shade of lipstick the makeup artist had chosen for the bridesmaids. The photographer snapped candid shots, capturing what would later be described as the bride's quiet moment of reflection before the ceremony. But Maya wasn't reflecting on her future happiness. She was remembering the moment 3 weeks ago, when she'd found herself crying in her car after another wedding planning meeting, unable to explain why choosing between 2 nearly identical shades of cream for the table linens had felt like the most important decision in the world. She was thinking about how Michael, her fiancé, had dismissed her suggestion to hire a local photographer instead of his preferred high-end studio, saying they needed to think about how the photos would look in the society pages. Everything about this wedding was perfect on paper. Michael was handsome, intelligent, and came from a prominent family that her parents adored. He made excellent money at his law firm and had already started talking about the house they'd buy in the right neighborhood, the country club membership. That would be essential for his career, the timeline for children that would fit perfectly with his partnership track. Her parents had been thrilled when he proposed, her mother immediately diving into planning what she called the wedding of the century. Maya had gone along with it all, making decisions that felt more like checking boxes than choosing details. For the most important day of her life, flowers, check. Dress, check. Menu, check. Band, check. Everything had been decided based on what looked impressive, what would photograph well, what would make the right impression on the 200 guests who would attend. But somewhere in the endless meetings with caterers and florists, Maya had lost herself completely. Her camera, once her constant companion, sat unused in her closet. Her dreams of freelance photography had been gently but firmly discouraged by Michael, who pointed out that his future wife wouldn't need to work and certainly wouldn't need to pursue something as unstable as artistic photography. Her secret savings account, once earmarked for a photography workshop in Europe, had been absorbed into wedding expenses. The person looking back at her from the mirror felt like a stranger. Dressed up in someone else's dream. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. She opened the window of the hotel suite and looked down at the loading dock 3 floors below, where catering trucks were still arriving with last-minute supplies. The fire escape was old but sturdy, the kind of thing her practical father would have checked twice before trusting. Her heart pounded as she grabbed the small overnight bag she'd packed and hidden in the bathroom closet 3 days earlier. She'd told herself it was just paranoia, just cold feet that every bride experienced. But as she slung the bag over her shoulder and carefully climbed out the window in her wedding dress, she realized she'd been planning this escape subconsciously. For weeks, the fire escape creaked under her weight, and the silk of her dress caught on the metal railings, but Maya moved with a determination that surprised her. She'd never been particularly brave or rebellious. She'd always been the good daughter, the one who made sensible choices and followed the path her parents had carefully mapped out for her career, her relationships, her entire life, but something about the morning light and the sound of her own breathing and the feeling of metal under her hands made her feel more awake than she'd been in months. By the time she reached the ground level, she was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. Her car was parked in the hotel's guest lot, already loaded with the photography equipment she'd bought but never used, clothes for a week, and the envelope of cash she'd been secretly saving for 2 months. She'd liquidated her personal savings account the week before, telling the bank teller she was planning a surprise honeymoon upgrade for Michael. The lie had come so easily that it had scared her. Maya drove out of the hotel parking lot just as the wedding coordinator was probably discovering her empty suite. She didn't have a destination in mind, only knew she needed to get as far away as possible from the life that had felt like a beautiful cage. She turned off her phone after the first call from her mother, knowing that within minutes her absence would create chaos that would ripple through 2 families and 200 wedding guests. For the first hour, she drove in a state of shocked calm, processing what she'd just done. She'd left a man at the altar. She'd humiliated her family. She'd thrown away a secure future for something as uncertain as following her heart. The practical side of her brain, the part that had been trained since childhood to consider consequences and appearances, kept trying to convince her to turn around. But as the city gave way to suburbs and then to countryside, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Real, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. She rolled down the windows despite her carefully styled hair, turned up the radio, and for the first time in months, she laughed out loud. The mountains appeared on the horizon as afternoon turned to evening. Maya had never driven this far from the city by herself, had never made an impulsive decision of this magnitude. She stopped for gas at a small station where the attendant did a double take at her wedding dress, but was polite enough not to ask questions. She bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips, the first food she'd eaten all day. As the sun began to set, the sky turned the kind of deep pink and orange that she'd always wanted to photograph but had never taken the time to capture. She pulled over at a scenic overlook and stood beside her car, breathing in mountain air that tasted nothing like the recycled atmosphere of corporate offices and hotel suites. That's when the weather changed. Mountain storms, Maya would later learn, could appear with frightening speed. One moment the sky was painted in sunset colors, and the next, dark clouds were rolling over the peaks like a gray blanket being pulled across the world. The first drops of rain were warm and gentle, but within minutes they became a downpour that turned the mountain road into a treacherous ribbon of wet asphalt. Maya had never driven in conditions like this. Her city driving experience hadn't prepared her for winding mountain roads made slick by sudden rain. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaning forward to peer through the windshield as her wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge. Every curve felt dangerous. Every hill a challenge she wasn't sure she could handle. When her car started making a grinding noise and the engine temperature gauge crept into the red zone, Maya knew she was in real trouble. She managed to pull over at what looked like a small industrial building with lights still on in the windows. Steam rose from under her car's hood, and she realized that her dramatic escape had led her to a place where she was completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. Still wearing her muddy wedding dress, shivering in the mountain cold, Maya walked toward the lighted building, hoping that whoever was inside would be willing to help a woman who had clearly made some very dramatic life choices. David looked up from his blueprints when he heard the knock on his office door. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and nobody came by his construction office this late unless there was an emergency. He'd been working on plans for the Thompson family's new kitchen, trying to figure out how to maximize storage space in their small ranch house. The rain had been pounding against his office windows for the past hour, turning what had started as a gentle evening shower into a proper mountain storm. When he opened the door, he almost didn't believe what he saw. A young woman stood under his small porch overhang, soaked to the skin and shivering. But it wasn't just that she was wet that caught his attention. She was wearing what was unmistakably a wedding dress, though it was now muddy and torn at the hem. Her dark hair, which had probably been styled perfectly hours earlier, hung in wet strands around her face. Her makeup had run, leaving dark smudges under her eyes, and she was barefoot, holding a pair of what looked like expensive high heels in one hand. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her teeth chattering. "My car broke down, and you're the only place with lights on. I don't have anywhere else to go." David's first instinct was suspicion. In his experience, people didn't just show up at his door in wedding dresses at 10 o'clock at night unless something was seriously wrong. His protective instincts, honed by years of being responsible for his daughters, told him to be careful. But looking at this woman, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't dangerous or crazy. She looked lost, exhausted, and genuinely afraid. "What happened to your car?" he asked, stepping aside to let her into the warmth of his office. It started making awful noises about a mile back, and then steam started coming from under the hood. "I don't know much about cars, but I think something important broke." Maya wrapped her arms around herself, still shivering despite being out of the rain. "I saw your lights and thought maybe someone could help me figure out what to do." David handed her a clean shop towel from his desk drawer. "You can dry off with this. There's a coffee pot over there if you want something warm." He studied her for a moment, trying to piece together her story. "I have to ask, though, why are you driving around in a wedding dress in the middle of a storm?" Maya's laugh had no humor in it. "That's a very long story." "I've got time," David said simply. Over the next hour, sitting in David's small office with its walls covered in construction photos and building permits, Maya told him everything. She talked about the suffocating feeling of planning a wedding that felt more like a business merger than a celebration of love. She described the moment she realized she was marrying the life her parents wanted for her, not the life she wanted for herself. She explained how she'd climbed down a fire escape in a $5,000 wedding dress because staying felt impossible. David listened without judgment, occasionally refilling her coffee cup or adding more sugar when she mentioned she usually didn't drink it black. He found himself thinking about his own experience with marriage, how different it was from what Maya was describing. He and Linda had been young and broke when they got married, planning everything themselves in Linda's tiny apartment. Their wedding had cost less than Maya's dress, but it had felt real in a way that Maya's elaborate ceremony clearly hadn't. "So now I'm here," Maya finished, "in your office in a wedding dress with a broken car and nowhere to go. I know how this must look." "It looks like you made a brave choice," David said quietly. "Not many people would have the courage to walk away from a life that looks perfect from the outside." Maya stared at him, surprised by his response. "Most people would say I'm crazy, that I threw away something good for no reason." "Most people don't have to live your life," David pointed out. "Only you know what's right for you." The storm continued. to rage outside, and David realized that Maya wasn't going anywhere tonight. Even if her car had been working, the mountain roads were too dangerous in weather like this. "Look," he said, "you can't drive anywhere in this storm, and even if you could, your car needs work. I have a small guest cabin behind my house where my daughters sometimes have sleepovers with friends. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. You can stay there tonight, and in the morning I'll take a look at your car." Maya felt tears well up in her eyes at his kindness. "I can't pay you much. I have some cash, but not enough for a real mechanic or a hotel room. We'll figure something out," David said. "Right now, you just need a safe place to sleep." The next morning, David discovered that Maya's car needed a new radiator, a water pump, and probably a few other things that would take time to order and install. The repair costs would eat up most of her cash savings. As he explained this to Maya over coffee at the local diner, he found himself making an offer that surprised them both. "I could use some help with the business side of things," he said. "Paperwork, scheduling, maybe updating my website. It's not glamorous work, but if you're willing to help out for a few weeks while your car gets fixed, I could pay you enough to cover the repairs and give you time to figure out your next step." Maya looked around the small diner with its red vinyl booths and handwritten daily specials on a chalkboard. A week ago, she'd been planning to honeymoon in Paris. Now she was considering staying in a mountain town she'd never heard of, working for a man she'd just met. The old Maya would have called her parents, accepted their help, and returned to the safe but suffocating life she'd known, but something about David's steady presence and the genuine kindness he'd shown her made the offer feel like exactly what she needed. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd really like that." The first week passed quickly. Maya threw herself into organizing David's chaotic filing system, discovering that he'd been storing important business documents in shoeboxes and manila folders that hadn't been labeled in years. She created spreadsheets for his ongoing projects, set up a simple bookkeeping system, and started returning calls from potential clients who'd left messages weeks earlier. David's daughters, Lily and Rose, were initially curious about the strange woman staying in their guest cabin. They'd peek around corners when Maya was working at the kitchen table, whispering to each other about why she was there and whether she was going to stay. David had explained simply that Maya was helping with work and needed a place to stay while her car was being fixed. The girls accepted this explanation with the adaptability that children show when adults present information. Matter-of-factly. It was Rose who first warmed up to Maya. The 8-year-old was working on a school art project about different types of families, and she'd gotten frustrated trying to draw people that looked realistic. Maya, who noticed the girl's struggle, sat down beside her at the kitchen table. "Can I show you a trick?" Maya asked gently. "When I was learning to draw, my art teacher taught me that if you look at the shapes instead of trying to draw a person, it gets easier." For the next hour, Maya patiently showed Rose how to break down complex figures into simple shapes, how to observe the way light fell across objects, how to use shading to make drawings look three-dimensional. Rose's face lit up as her stick figures transformed into people who actually looked like people. Lily, not to be outdone by her sister, soon joined their impromptu art lesson. Maya found herself explaining color theory to 2 8-year-olds. Showing them how blue and yellow made green, but also how different blues and different yellows made different kinds of green. The girls were fascinated by concepts that Maya had forgotten she knew, artistic knowledge that had been buried under years of corporate meetings and wedding planning. David, coming home from a job site to find his daughters and Maya bent over a pile of art supplies at his kitchen table, felt something shift in his chest. His house, which had been quiet and orderly for the past 3 years, suddenly felt alive with laughter and creative energy. Maya looked up when he walked in, her face flushed with excitement as she explained the girls' latest artistic discoveries, and David realized he hadn't seen anyone look that genuinely happy in a very long time. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, David and Maya sat on his front porch drinking coffee and listening to the crickets. Maya had changed out of her business clothes into jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked more relaxed than she had since arriving in town. "Thank you," she said quietly. For everything. For helping me, for giving me work, for not asking too. Many questions about why I'm running away from my life. Everyone deserves a second chance to figure things out, David replied. Besides, you're helping me too. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to get my business organized. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of them aware that something was changing, but neither ready to name it yet. Maya was discovering that she enjoyed the rhythm of small-town life. The way people waved when they passed each other on the street, the satisfaction of doing work that felt meaningful. David was remembering what it felt like to share his daily experiences with someone who listened with genuine interest. Neither of them planned to fall in love. But as the days passed and Maya's temporary stay stretched into something that felt less temporary, they both began to realize that sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them. 6 weeks had passed since Maya first knocked on David's office door in her muddy wedding dress. What had started as a temporary arrangement was beginning to feel like something neither of them wanted to end. Maya's car had been fixed for 2 weeks now, sitting in David's driveway, ready to take her wherever she wanted to go. But each morning, she found another reason to stay just one more day. The morning routine had become comfortable and natural. Maya would wake up in the guest cabin and walk to the main house, where David would already have coffee brewing. They'd sit at his kitchen table, planning the day's work schedule while Lily and Rose ate their breakfast and gathered their school supplies. The girls had stopped treating Maya like a temporary visitor and started including her in their daily lives as if she'd always been there. David found himself looking forward to these quiet morning moments more than he cared to admit. Maya had a way of listening that made even ordinary things feel worth sharing. She'd ask about his current projects, offering suggestions that came from her fresh perspective on his business. She'd help the girls find lost homework or solve friendship problems with a patience that reminded David of all the things a good mother should be. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that everything changed. Rose had been playing on the jungle gym at school when she slipped and fell, landing hard on her left arm. The school nurse called David first, but he was 40 minutes away on a job site with poor cell reception. Maya, who was listed as the emergency contact for both girls, received the call next. By the time David got the message and raced to the hospital, Maya was already there, holding Rose's good hand while a doctor explained that the arm was broken and would need a cast. Rose was being brave, but David could see the fear in her daughter's eyes and the relief that washed over her face when she saw him walk into the room. Maya stayed with me the whole time, Rose told her father, her voice small but proud. She didn't leave even when the doctor said it might take a long time. David looked at Maya, who was still holding his daughter's hand, and felt something crack open inside his chest. This woman, who had no obligation to his children, who could have simply called him and waited for him to handle the emergency, had stepped in without hesitation. She'd comforted his scared little girl and made sure she wasn't alone in a frightening situation that evening. After Rose was settled at home with her bright pink cast and a collection of get-well cards from her classmates, David and Maya found themselves alone on the front porch again. But the comfortable silence they'd shared before felt different now, charged with emotions that neither of them quite knew how to handle. "Thank you," David said finally, "for being there today, for taking care of her like she was your own." Maya felt her heart skip at his words. "I couldn't leave her alone. She was so scared and you were too far away. It just felt like the right thing to do." "It was more than the right thing," David said quietly. "It was what a mother would do." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maya had been thinking the same thing during those hours at the hospital, feeling a fierce protectiveness toward Rose that had surprised her with its intensity. She'd realized that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, these 2 little girls had found their way into her heart in a way that felt permanent and unshakable. "David," Maya began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. "I know," he said, and when she looked at him, she saw her own confusion and hope reflected in his eyes. "I feel it too." The next few days brought a new awareness too. Their interactions. David caught himself watching Maya as she helped Lily with a school project, noticing the way she encouraged his daughter's creativity while gently guiding her toward practical solutions. Maya found herself studying David as he patiently explained to Rose how to eat soup one-handed, admiring his endless patience and the way he made even frustrating situations feel manageable. They were falling in love, though neither of them said the words out loud. David, because he'd sworn he'd never open his heart to that kind of vulnerability again. Maya, because she was still figuring out who she was when she wasn't trying to be the person everyone else expected her to be. The girls, with the uncanny intuition that children possess, sensed the change in the adults around them. Lily started asking Maya if she liked living in their town, if she missed the city, if she thought their house was nice enough for someone who used to live in fancy places. Rose, emboldened by Maya's presence during her scary hospital visit, began showing her special treasures and secret places around their property that she'd never shared with anyone before. One evening, while David was putting the girls to bed, Maya wandered around his living room, really looking at it for the first time. The walls were covered with photographs of Lily and Rose at various ages, their artwork from school, and certificates from David's business achievements. But there were no pictures of him with the girl's mother, no wedding photos or romantic mementos. It was as if that part of his life had been carefully erased, leaving only the evidence of his role as a father. When David came back downstairs, he found Maya standing in front of a photo of him and the girls at last year's county fair, all three of them laughing at something outside the camera's view. "You're a really good father," Maya said without turning around. "The girls are lucky to have you." "They're everything to me," David replied, coming to stand beside her. "After Linda left, they were the only reason I kept going. I promised myself I'd never put them through the chaos of another relationship that might not work out." Maya turned to face him, seeing the conflict in his expression. "Is that what this is? Chaos?" David looked at her for a long moment, taking in her dark hair that always seemed to catch the lamplight, her eyes that had lost the haunted look they'd carried when she first arrived, her smile that had become as familiar to him as his daughter's faces. "No," he said honestly, "this is the opposite of chaos. This feels like coming home." Before either of them could think too hard about the wisdom of it, David reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Maya's ear. The simple touch sent electricity through both of them, and Maya found herself stepping closer, drawn by something stronger than common sense. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of questions and hope and the fear that comes with taking risks after being hurt. When they broke apart, David rested his forehead against Maya's, both of them breathing like they'd just run a long race. "I'm scared," Maya whispered. "Me too," David admitted. "But I'm more scared of letting you go." They might have stood there longer, figuring out what came next, but the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell. David looked out the window and frowned. A sleek black sedan sat in his driveway, completely out of place in his neighborhood of pickup trucks and family cars. The knock on the door came moments later, sharp and demanding. David opened it to find a man in an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Behind him stood an older couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine. "Where is she?" the man demanded without preamble. "We know Maya is here." David felt Maya come up behind him, her sharp intake of breath telling him everything he needed to know. Her past had finally caught up with her, and their fragile new beginning was about to be tested in ways neither of them had prepared for. "Hello." "Michael," Maya said quietly, her voice steadier than David had expected. "Mom, Dad." The man David now realized was Maya's ex-fiancé pushed past him into the living room, his eyes cold with anger and what looked like wounded pride. "Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" "What you've put me through?" "The humiliation, the questions, the money we've lost because of your little breakdown?" Maya's parents followed, her mother immediately taking in the modest surroundings, with barely concealed disdain. "Maya, darling, what are you doing in this place? We've been worried sick about you." David felt his protective instincts surge, but Maya stepped forward before he could speak. I'm fine, she said calmly. I'm exactly where I need to be. You're living in some kind of fantasy, Michael snapped. Playing house with a stranger while real life falls apart around you. This has gone on long enough. You're coming home with us tonight. David saw the moment when Maya's newfound confidence wavered, when the voices of authority and expectation that had controlled her for so long tried to reassert their power. He also saw her take a deep breath and find her strength again, the strength she'd been building during her weeks in Willowbrook. No, Maya said simply. I'm not. The word landed in the room like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples. That would change everything that came after. David felt a surge of pride and fear in equal measure, knowing that Maya was fighting for something precious, but understanding that the battle was far from over, the confrontation that would determine. Their future was just beginning. The silence that followed Maya's simple no felt heavy and dangerous. Michael's face turned red with anger, while Maya's mother looked like she might faint from the shock of her daughter's defiance. Her father stepped forward, using the voice that had commanded boardrooms for 30 years. Maya, you're being ridiculous, he said firmly. You've had your little adventure, but it's time to come home and fix the mess you've made. Michael has been very understanding about your cold feet, and he's willing to forgive this whole episode if you come to your senses now. David watched Maya's face carefully, seeing the old patterns of doubt and submission trying to reassert themselves. Her shoulders tensed, and for a moment, he was afraid she might give in to the pressure of these people who claimed to love her but seemed determined to control her. Understanding? Maya's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it that David hadn't heard before. Michael, you've spent the last 6 weeks telling people I had a nervous breakdown, haven't you? That I'm not mentally stable enough to make my own decisions? Michael's expression shifted slightly, confirming her guess. You left me at the altar, Maya. What was I supposed to tell people? That my fiancé decided to run away and play house with some small-town nobody? The words hit David like a physical blow, but before he could respond, Maya stepped protectively in front of him. Don't you dare talk about him like that. David is worth 10 of you, and this small town has shown me more kindness in 6 weeks than I got in 2 years of planning a wedding with you. Kindness doesn't pay bills, Maya's mother interjected, her voice sharp with frustration. What kind of future can you possibly have here? You gave up a successful career, a beautiful home, a husband who could provide for you properly. For what? To live in some cabin and do filing work? Maya looked around David's modest living room, taking in the family photos, the girls' artwork on the refrigerator, the comfortable furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than appearance. 6 weeks ago, she might have seen it as small and limiting. Now she saw it as real, warm, and filled with the kind of love that money couldn't buy. You're right, Maya said, surprising everyone in the room. My old life did look better on paper. Better house, better job, better wedding photos, but I was miserable every single day. I was so busy being the person you all wanted me to be that I forgot who I actually was. She turned to face Michael directly, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. We weren't in love, Michael. We were in a business arrangement that looked like love from the outside. You wanted a wife who would photograph well at firm events and wouldn't cause problems with your career plans. I wanted to please my parents and follow the path that seemed safest. That's not marriage, that's a contract. And this is? Michael gestured dismissively around the room. Living with a man you barely know? Playing stepmother to children who aren't yours? David felt anger rising in his chest, but Maya's hand found his, squeezing gently to let him know she could handle this fight herself. I know David better after 6 weeks than I knew you after 2 years, she said firmly. I know he gets up at 5:30 every morning to plan his workday so he can be home when his daughters get out of school. I know he spent 3 years building his business back from nothing because his ex-wife and business partner betrayed him, but he never became bitter about it. I know he reads bedtime stories in different voices for each character because it makes the girls laugh. She paused, her voice becoming softer but no less determined. I know he held my hand in an emergency room when his daughter was hurt, even though he barely knew me because he could see I was scared too. I know he's taught me what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not who someone else wants me to be. Maya's father tried a different approach, his voice gentler. Sweetheart, you're not thinking clearly. This man is nice, I'm sure, but he has baggage. An ex-wife, 2 children, a small business in the middle of nowhere. You could do so much. Better for who? Maya asked. Better for you? Better for your image of what my life should look like? She looked at her parents with sadness rather than anger. I love you both, but I can't live my life trying to make you proud anymore. I have to live it in a way that makes me proud. The sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted the tense conversation. Lily appeared in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Daddy! Maya, what's happening? Who are these people? David immediately moved to his daughter, kneeling down to her eye level. These are some friends of Maya's who came to visit. They'll be leaving soon, and then we can all get back to sleep. But Lily, with the directness that 8-year-olds possess, looked right at Maya. Are you leaving with them? Rose is worried. She woke up when she heard the loud voices, and she's scared you're going to go away. Maya felt her heart break and mend at the same time. She knelt down beside David, speaking directly to Lily. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. This is my home now with you and Rose and your daddy. Promise? Lily asked, the way children do when they need absolute certainty. I promise, Maya said, and as she spoke the words, she realized she'd never meant anything more completely in her life. Michael made a sound of disgust. This is insane, Maya. You're throwing away everything for some fantasy family that isn't even yours. Maya stood up slowly, keeping her hand on Lily's shoulder. You're wrong, Michael. They are my family. Maybe not by blood or law yet, but by choice. By love, by showing up every day and caring about each other's happiness. She looked at her parents. One more time, hoping they might understand. I'm not asking you to approve of my choices. I'm just asking you to accept that they're mine to make. I'm 29 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm truly happy. Isn't that worth something? Her mother's face softened slightly, though her father still looked stern with disapproval. Maya, if you walk away from this opportunity, from Michael, there won't be another chance like this. I know, Maya said simply. I'm counting on it. The visitors left 20 minutes later, after Michael's final attempt to convince Maya that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Maya's parents promised to stay in touch, though her father warned that she shouldn't expect financial help if her experiment failed. Maya assured them she wouldn't ask for any dot after their car disappeared down the mountain road. David and Maya sat on his front porch in the quiet darkness. Lily had gone back to bed, satisfied that Maya wasn't leaving, and the house was peaceful. Again, are you sure? David asked quietly. You're giving up a lot for something that's still pretty new between us. Maya turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. This strong, steady man who'd rebuilt his life from scratch was still afraid of being hurt again. I'm sure, she said. The question is, are you? David took her hand, thinking about the wall he'd built around his heart after Linda left, and how Maya had somehow found her way through every defense he'd constructed. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd fall in love again, I'd have laughed at them. But you've changed everything, Maya. You've made me remember what it feels like to want to share my life with someone. Their second kiss was different from their first. This one was a promise, a commitment, a choice they were both making with their eyes wide open. 6 months later, Maya opened her photography studio in downtown Willowbrook, specializing in family portraits and wedding photography. Her first clients were young couples who wanted their wedding photos to capture real emotion rather than perfect poses. Word spread quickly about the photographer who understood that the best pictures showed people as they really were, not as they thought they should be. David proposed on a Tuesday evening while they were all making dinner together. There was no grand gesture, no expensive ring. Just a simple question asked while Maya helped Rose measure ingredients for pancakes and Lily set the table. Will you marry me? He asked, and Maya said yes before he'd even finished the question. Their Wedding took place in the meadow behind David's house on a crisp October morning. Maya wore a simple white dress she'd chosen herself, and Lily and Rose served as flower girls, scattering wildflowers they'd picked the morning of the ceremony. The guest list included David's construction crew, Maya's photography clients, the girls' teachers, and Maya's parents, who had finally accepted that their daughter was genuinely happy. Maya's father walked her down the makeshift aisle. "And when—" "The minister asked who gave this woman to be married," he said quietly. "She gives herself, as it should be." As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to build a life together based on honesty, respect, and the courage to keep choosing each other every day, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd run away from one wedding to find her way to another, from a life that looked perfect to one that actually was. David slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and Maya realized that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as disasters. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. That evening, as they danced to music playing from David's old radio in their backyard, surrounded by people who loved them for exactly who they were, Maya knew she'd finally found her way home.